Hi, this is Len Edgerly for the Kindle Chronicles podcast. Today is Friday, January 14th, 2022, and we are still on Sanibel Island in Florida. This morning I spoke with Lisa Gardner, who is a best-selling author. She's had a number of different series, and on Tuesday, January 14th, the second in her Frankie Elkin series is going to be released by Dutton. It's available for pre-order now. She'll be starting a book tour, I think on Monday night. And it's a great book. I've read it. I didn't read the first one. I think I might go back and read it. It's about looking for a missing person in Boston. And this new book, One Step Too Far, is set in Wyoming, which really caught my eye when I was sent an invitation to interview her and told about the book. So had fun talking with her. I think I'll jump into the interview and I'll have some comments afterward. I began by asking Lisa to describe the challenge that her character Frankie Elkin faced in the first book, which was published early last year, and also this one, which is coming out in just a few days.
Frankie Elkin is an everyday average person, so not former anything, not a private investigator, and she has become obsessed all on her own with working missing persons cold cases. So in Before She Disappeared, the first book, the scenario again is one of those cases that falls through the cracks. It's a missing Haitian teen in Boston who's been missing 11 months. I mean, at that point in cold cases, particularly missing persons, where everything, if you don't get it in 48 hours, everything dries up. Interesting enough in real life, and that's where some of this inspiration has come from Frankie, at that point, an outsider, someone who's just, if there was the right forensics, it would have happened. If the police had the right leads, they would have solved the case. So it becomes this interesting scenario where the right person, the right time, and the right place, asking the right questions, and generally speaking, to be honest, not a cop. Someone who can move through a neighborhood and talk to family, talk to neighbors, and people feel a little bit more comfortable talking to. And so that's Frankie's superpower. She is a great listener. And interesting enough, we have many of those kinds of cases. So Before She Disappeared has to do with basically missing urban minorities, which I think we all know by now is a big issue in the United States, and they often fall through the cracks. One Step Too Far is almost a total 180 turn, where you're looking at now the number of people that go missing each year in we call them the national wildlands, basically our national parks, the woods. Again, it's one of those scenarios where search and rescue is a volunteer operation for pretty much all mountains. I live in the mountains of New Hampshire. So you got 3 to maybe 6 weeks where you will get the National Guard and volunteers and search dog teams and drones and pilots and all this stuff. But then, sooner or later, they all have to go home. And then those cases, there's no one left to work on. They're not assigned anyone. Those people they almost like disappear twice. So that becomes the scenario that inspires One Step Too Far, Frankie's determination again to provide closure and to bring someone home to their family.
Now, Frankie's a fascinating character. The Washington Post called her one of the most original characters in recent crime fiction. Give us some of the highlights of what makes her such an intriguing character.
Frankie is fascinating to me because I've written the FBI profilers and the police detectives and even this vigilante Floridian. And Frankie really is just us. She's not kick-ass. She's not wise-ass. She's a little wise-ass, but she's a great proxy for she's a little lost. Modern living is not working for her. She does not really understand this. You have one home and a white picket fence and one job and a steady relationship. She's not opposed to those things. She just can't figure them out. They don't work for her. And pretty practically, when she stays still, she starts drinking again. And she's a recovering alcoholic. As she puts it, she has more regrets than belongings. And now she's just basically the rolling stone that gathers no moss. If she just keeps moving, so that's what she does. She goes from town to town, case to case, all on her own. And there's something about this and this mission and the obsessiveness of working cases for people she's never met, for recognition she'll never get, and, basically no income, that honestly enough keeps her sober. But there's this recognition in her at all times that she's always the outsider. And she actually likes people, but she can't figure out modern life. So it's like by living an anti-life, eschewing all the stuff that we think is what our lives are supposed to look like, she's actually finding her way. And I think it just makes her interesting.
I'll say. There's a lot of hard drinking in crime novels, but I don't recall anybody going as deep into what it's really like to be a real recovering alcoholic. And I'll celebrate 37 years of sobriety next month, and so active in AA, and so that really intrigued me. In your research part, the 3 months you do the research, what kind of research did you do about addiction and AA that gave you? I thought that was a pretty realistic portrayal of how one person would be participating in that way of recovering. Yeah, and thank you. I'll be honest, Frankie is a little bit of my apology to readers for books I've done in the past. I will say at the beginning of my career, and, for the record, it's been 30 years now, but I had a tendency to fall into those cliches. The hard drinking or even have characters. I was an alcoholic, where as in, anyone in recovery, it's never true. You always are an addict. Mm-hmm. And I would get mail and I'd get people talk to me. And I was like, I never want to feel like I'm someone who is doing the cliche thing. And clearly I have. So if I'm going to talk about someone who was an addict or is an addict, and I thought for Frankie, it was important because she's basically trying to take her addictive behavior personalities, the obsessiveness, the restlessness, the fact that she doesn't belong. So now she has a job where actually not belonging is kind of the key to success. It's like she's trying to take all those things that make her an addict and try to use them for good. But if you're really going to do this deep drive, because her addiction really is a huge identifier for her, it is how she is stumbling her way through this universe. You had to get it right. And I was very blessed to have a lot of great friends. I had permission for some recovery programs. And I think all of us have some addict in us. It's just, is it, binge watching Netflix? Is it, I have a real issue with chocolate. And day in and day out, how do you live with that? How do you manage yourself? I think particularly the last 2 years, we've all gotten a lesson in managing ourselves is harder than we thought. Yeah, amen to that. I also lived 20 years in Wyoming and Casper, and so your portrayal of Wyoming, I thought, was also dead on based on my experience. And I see that because of the pandemic, you never get to do any research in Wyoming, so that fascinated me. How you basically your 3 months of research this time was kind of virtual research, and I know I've talked to Chuck Box, and he lives in Wyoming. Was he one of your helpers, or?
Oh, don't I wish. He and I worked together on some things, but I would never take up his time. He has his own novels and some really exciting projects going on in his world. But the good news for me, because you're right, I like to be in person in places to write them. But I am from the West Coast originally. I grew up in Oregon. I have done some hiking in that area. I am an avid hiker in the mountains of New Hampshire, which is not the same conditions, but at least I could take something like, I know my hiking, and I've taken wilderness survival courses, and I've spent a lot of time in the backwoods where there's no cell reception and things like that. So the mindset of that, the intensity of that is real to me. And then I had to just kind of adapt to, I have hiked in the West. Let's pull this all together. But I will tell you, I'm looking forward to, I'm looking at early this summer that I will finally get to hike some of these things I talked about in Wyoming. Because the more I wrote this book, the more I was like, why am I not hiking in Wyoming right now?
Yeah.
Who wouldn't want to be there?
Exactly. A great place to be.
Exactly.
I thought you've had thinly disguised locations in the past, and is the setting for this Lander by any chance, which is a town on the edge of the Paposia Wilderness?
Yeah, it is. I looked at a kind of a compilation of towns there.
Yeah.
And then my real issue I had to do is I needed a very specific geographic landscape kind of issue for this cliff, this boulder field that features prominently Devil's Canyon. Mm-hmm. So I do have a note in the book for One Step Too Far. For all of those of you living in Wyoming thinking, I've never heard of Devil's Canyon. No, you have not.
Right,
so,
right.
There are these moments as a writer. You want to do your research. You want to make locations coming alive. Wyoming is such a fabulous location and a great, scary, scary place to get lost in the woods. But then also every now and then it is fiction, and there's reasons to take advantage of that.
Yeah. You have both. Now, you've got a book tour coming up. I see the first event's in Conway Monday night in person, but with the latest outbreak, are you still going to be able to do that in person?
No, so basically we're doing what so many book events still are these days. In my backyard, so my own hometown, we're going to do an in-person with various protocols in place. Yeah. In terms of plane and travel, they're still basically virtual. The good news is internationally now, I mean, wherever you sit, wherever you are, you can now log in and watch Lisa Gardner book tour. I'm talking with some really great authors next week. We do a lot of things now where we partner authors. So one of my favorite books I've read recently is S.A. Cosby's Razorblade Tears. He and I will be in conversation. Monday night, I'm with Mark Sinnott, who is the real deal for wilderness hiking guide, survivalist. Like, I'm going to talk about, I hiked mountains in New Hampshire, and he's going to talk about, I hiked Everest. So it will be a lot of fun. But he authored The Third Pole, and he's an amazing author. So people should check it out on lisagardner.com or social media. And there's some really cool authors, and hopefully just great nights of talking books. So please join us virtually. That's what we have.
And if folks go to lisagardner.com, it looks like for most of those events, they actually get a ticket. They're free, but you want people to register. Please
do register, yes. For the independent bookstore sponsoring them, that helps them navigate things from their end.
Yeah, that'll be great. I was intrigued because your schedule of working on your books, the 3 months of research, 6 months of writing, 3 months of revision, it seems like that's been in place a long time, all the way back to some of your first books. And I wondered, especially the research part of it, I can imagine it's always hard to stop researching something as you get interested in Bigfoot and all the cool things in this book and cadaver dogs. And do you have a date on your calendar that says 3 months is up, writing begins today, or how much slack do you give yourself on that?
That's a valid question. When I was doing the police procedurals, what really was about scheduling a lot of interviews and going places and doing things, I definitely tried to group it so I could get it done, so I could get to writing, because I'm a contracted author and there's a deadline. As I get more fluid now, like Frankie's, those books are still research intensive. There's all sorts of things to know. But sometimes I get to a point where I know enough I can kind of start writing. And by doing that, though, I also start to identify the next thing I need to know. And it can become a little integrated. And like Search Dogs, I've done a lot of work with them in the past. I had the opportunity to go to the Body Farm. Gosh, it must be 10 years ago now. In one of those kind of serendipity moments, the other people at the Body Farm at that point were a cadaver dog team. They were looking for opportunities to train their dogs with human remains, because you're not exactly allowed in most states to bury body parts in your backyard. Yeah. And as One Step Too Far talks about, there's still a lot of controversy about synthetic cadaver scent, and is that really a great training tool, that kind of stuff. So I thought I knew a lot, but the more I got into this, the more it's like, I'm not actually sure, and some things have changed. And so I was very fortunate in my own backyard. We also have a working canine training organization. They train canines for a number of things, but it included search and rescue. And I am a dog owner. I'm very involved with my local rescue association. And I can't write this afternoon. I must go play with dogs. It's work, I tell you. It's work, and I'm working very hard. So I had to go play with dogs a bit. I had to.
I came across a delightful piece that was in consultingmag.com in 2009. It was kind of a profile of you, and it said, Lisa Gardner's consulting career was cut short by a husband who savagely murdered 10 women. I thought, can this be true? Is this someone has this been therapy all these years? The poor woman had a horrible experience, and then he goes on to say, the psychopathic spouse is the villain of Gardner's.
That's awesome. I like how they put that.
I was like the best lead I've ever seen. Talk about, I'll read the next sentence. Give me another one. But that time that you were worked at Mercer Management, a consulting firm, you were kind of a lowly research assistant, obviously exploited. And I love the story of sitting around with your fellow researchers planning how to kill people, which was sort of foreshadowing. But that business of research, and when you were talking at first of how Frankie, she knows how to ask questions, and I've got a friend that worked at Bain for a while, and boy, you get dropped into a situation, and you just have to kind of be like Frankie and follow your instincts and do your homework. But has that been kind of a continuing gift those 2 years in kind of the work that you're doing now?
I think that's very well said. I think those 2 years as a research analyst are what gave me the comfort to, one, move into suspense. Because at the beginning of my writing career, I loved to read thrillers. It was always what I liked the best. But my family would tell you, we produced a lot of engineers and accountants. There is not like a cop or anything among them, not even an EMT or first responder. So it's like, I didn't feel like I had the resources to write the way, really, for a while now, I think ever since Thomas Harris and Silence of the Lambs, people want authentic fiction. The crime can be over the top. Your procedure needs to be realistic. And I just didn't even know how to do that because it didn't occur to me that you could call up strangers and ask questions. Well, 2 years of being a research analyst later, where, you're 21, you're 22 years old, and they're literally just saying, hey, we need to know, like, how many widgets are made in this field by all the competitors. They're not going to want to tell you, but go find a way to get that information for us anyway. Yeah. It's kind of this weird, like, you just sit there and be like, oh my God, I have no idea. And, but you do learn, and this was what Frankie brings to the table. Necessity is the mother of all invention. Whatever you need to know, you figure it out. And sometimes it's just going for it. It's picking up the phone and making a cold call, and it's awkward and it's uncomfortable. It's trying to get someone to talk to you that doesn't have any reason to talk to you at all. And yet be polite, be respectful, be patient. And it's interesting what you can learn.
Yeah, that cold call business, you must have perfected it at this point. If you were going to advise, salesmen make cold calls. All kinds of people have to make cold calls. Have you got kind of a recipe if you were telling somebody, okay, I know you're scared about a cold call. Do this, this, and this. These are the things that will help it go well.
Sure. So I even have some advice on the website, lisagardner.com, for aspiring writers, because I deal a lot now with debut authors. I just love everything about it. I love all the new voices and fresh energy we're getting in the business. And everyone's like, well, you can call and get search and rescue dogs to play with you because you're Lisa Gardner. And it's like, yeah, never once in all of my years of doing this have I picked up the phone and called a fugitive tracking expert or a cadaver dog handler and had them go, oh, Lisa Gardner? Yeah, we love to read your books. No, none of these people do.
Well, when that happens, you'll know you've arrived, right? Well,
They're all just more like, wait, what? What the hell are you even talking about? It's like, I read your article on fugitive tracking in Swamp Magazine, and I'd like to use it in a novel. And they're like, all right, what kind of whack job do we have on the phone with us now? Yeah. So the tricks are, I'm interested in what you do as your profession. Mm-hmm. I want to get the details right. Mm-hmm. And I want to bring that information to the broader world so they understand what you do and they understand accurately what it does to take what you do, which clearly is very important and makes a difference in the world. Most people want to talk about their jobs at the end of the day. And honestly, we're all so exhausted now. We're just excited someone wants to hear about our day. Be sincere, though. Don't manipulate people. But, I think one of the things about being a novelist is, I'm crazy fascinated by other careers. I'm just what people do and little jobs you've never thought of. But it's like the grease that makes the wheels of society keep turning. They matter. Yeah. And why don't you want to get that right? And why don't you want to bring that to, broaden everyone else's awareness?
Yeah. And when you make the effort to get the details of someone's life right, it seems like there's a natural connection. You will then also get the emotions of that person in a way that you never would have if you just said, hey, how does it feel to train cadaver dogs? Yeah. You're sort of sneaking up on the stuff that's harder to get, because you're taking the details so seriously.
I always do start by talking about the easy procedures.
Yeah.
By the end, I always generally like to ask, as just a subject of interviews, what's the strangest case you ever worked? Or what's the weirdest project you had? Or what's the strangest call you ever got that other than mine, that you didn't expect to get? And sometimes those anecdotal things, that now has the kernel. I actually had this really interesting conversation when I was in the FBI field office in Atlanta. And I'd interviewed with the FBI a lot because I was doing profiler novels. And I actually realized I was getting bored. And I felt bad because this guy has set aside time. He is talking to me, and there's nothing here I don't already know, but I know I don't know everything. So I finally he was really sweet. He'd actually read my books. And not too many law enforcement are going to do this, but he was FBI. He was prepared. His superiors had assigned him to talk to this crazy woman who wrote novels. So he read the books so he could have the conversation. And so I was finally like, what did I get wrong in the books? And that was great. That was like one of the all-time best questions I've ever asked, because he was very respectful. But he's like, well, to be honest. And by the time he was done, I'm like, okay, now we know our next hour of conversation. Let me get this right. So sometimes you also have to start by, I know I'm screwing this up. Help me get it right.
Yeah. Wow. I could see the brilliance of that and especially knowing he'd read the book, you knew that he probably had stumbled on some stuff.
Yes. And it was great. I got 3 more novels out of that alone.
Wow. Well, in a case like that,
I appreciated him.
Yeah. Would you end up looping back, like say you had a really good conversation with somebody like that, and there's a passage in the book that heavily draws on it? Would you run the draft by that person to see if you got it right, or that could just take up a lot of time if you had to go back to everybody, I suppose? It
really depends. In one step too far, I'm the group of bachelor buddies that head into the woods, and then poor Tim goes missing, and now you got these 3 guilt-ridden dudes still trying to find their friend and the father. They're all engineering students. There's a lot of engineering that gets used in the books. All of my family are engineers, but I am not. So I'll be honest, I have a brother who was a great age and proxy for the young men involved. So I'm like, will you please read this? Because I'm doing my best here, but at one point they're basically using a pulley system and doing some stuff. And I'm like, I have no idea. And he would tell you in the ballpark of correct, but it did come back with a fair amount of red ink involved. Again, better you so we get this right. Yeah.
That's a kind of an intense what do they call it? A sensitivity reader, where if you're writing about ethnic stuff, you dare to do that within your family.
Well, I'm not mechanically inclined. And this is Traval, one of the guys is so injured. He's on a version of a litter. And I'm like, I'm not 100% sure I'm getting all of this right. And he'd done some of this actually.
Oh,
so
wow.
It was great. I would much rather get the details right.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's very humbling along the way.
Yeah, for sure. The other thing, this is kind of a personal interest of mine, since I do a lot of interviews with authors. In looking at some of the interviews that I've seen you do recently, I started feeling kind of a taxonomy of author interviews. There's the fan, who's, I love your stuff. And then occasionally there's the English major or the MFA, who I think wants to believe they understand your books more than you do. And all these very intriguing insights into the books. And then there's some people, I assume, that haven't had time to read the book maybe at all, or just skimmed it, and other people that want to prove they've read the book can you break into categories based on all the author interviews you've done, predictable templates of how people approach this task of talking with an author?
Well, that's actually a great question. I'm not really sure I can. I'll tell you that for myself and my sensibility, I'm enjoying our conversation very much, and not just because I'm,
right.
But I just like the reader or the enthusiastic reader and the person who's well read. So basically, to me, I like the talks that in the end we could be book club together, Lynn. Right. We're just talking about the books we love, the authors we love, how you write a book. I don't have an educational background in this stuff. I'm an international relations major and a former business consultant, research analyst. It's been great because I do now run a global corporation. But a lot of the kind of previous generation of thriller writers, we don't have MFAs. We didn't have even the opportunity to study commercial fiction and education. That's a more modern phenomenon. We just wrote. We read books we really loved by Stephen King and John Saul and all these other authors. And then we just plain sat down and wrote, and we learned as we went. So if you try to start talking about character motivation and fancy this and that, I'm like, I'll tell you honestly, it sounded good. So that's what I did. My daughter said I ruined her for English class because the teachers would talk about all of this, the price figure and this and that. And she's like, I can tell you now, my mom was bored that day, so she killed someone. I was like, yeah, pretty much. Yeah. That's all I got for you.
Exactly. Yeah. And that would be a challenge, because if somebody had, done the training and the point of view, all the things you learn in MFA workshops, you're sort of like a natural writer. You're doing the stories. And if they probe at craft stuff in a more academic way, you're going to kind of be a deer in the headlights saying, well, I hope we can move on to talk about the story or the characters or the murder or something.
I think there's value to both ways. It's the other big thing we talk about in writing is you have your pantsers versus your plotters.
Yeah. Now, I've heard that. What's the difference between those two?
Okay. So plotter is you've outlined the book.
Yeah.
And in the beginning of my career, I did, because, it's that terror of the blank page.
Yeah.
I need to know where I'm going, so I know what I'm writing. A pantser lets the story develop organically.
Seat of the pants, is that what that's
Seat of the pants, that's it, yeah. Uh-huh. So it's, I would almost say it's like a 50-50 split. And I joke all the time, we could be like that, taste great, less filling commercial that was years ago for Bud. Each side is passionate about their position.
Yeah.
I feel like for some people, the aspect of study, getting the MFA, knowing the terminology, knowing what they're supposed to do, guides their effort, much like a plot. I came up kind of the experiential learning side. I don't know what to call most of the stuff. I just have a sense of when it's done and when it's not done. But I don't, it's not a plan.
Yeah.
And I am a pantser. Each and every day I stare at the blank computer screen and mainline coffee and pray for something good to come out. And, once a year it does. So there you go.
Wow. That's like standing on a high cliff and looking down.
I don't recommend it for sanity, but then I hike a lot, which is how we've got one step too far, because I get stuck in the computer and I hate each other, so I have to go for a walk. Right.
Well, now, let's see. Some of the other series, you've had 11 books, 9 books, 3 books. There's 2 of Frankie so far. 12 books for Frankie to match the 12 steps of the program? How long do you think her series is going to last?
If I don't plan the novels, I certainly don't plan the series. Dee Dee Warren was never supposed to be a series. Flora Dane was never supposed to be a series. Now I've had a lot of people saying Dee Dee, Flora, and Frankie in a novel. Ooh. I have to admit, that sounds like good fun to me. Yeah. I don't know. The right idea will come, but I certainly think that's intriguing. But planning ahead is, I think we've established, not my forte.
Well, whatever you're doing, it seems to be working pretty well. I have been speaking with Lisa Gardner, author of One Step Too Far, available for pre-order from Dutton with release on Tuesday, January 18th. Thanks very much, Lisa.
Thank you very much. This has been a real pleasure.
I think my interview with Lisa might have been the first one she did today. I suspect there was quite a schedule that she had. Our conversation was at 8:15 Eastern Time, and she had a hard stop at 8:45, so that I know there was some more conversation she was going to have. I think it'd be fun if I can find out who else talked to her and then listen to them, because I'm always learning about how to do an author interview, and that's why I took the risk of asking that question about what kinds of author interviews has she seen. And I learned something in her answer, because I've known I haven't wanted to be, I'm a fan, although, sometimes it's really hard not to. Some of the people I really love talking to and I love their work. But this idea that I'm talking to an author as if we were in a book club, as she said, and we both love books, and probably we both love the book that we're talking about, the one that they wrote, and we have a relationship or feelings about the character. We can talk about the character. The character is very real to an author after spending all that time. And there may be authors who did go through MFA programs and are steeped in the craft that might enjoy someone probing some of the craft questions. But, I think that might be kind of rare. I think even if for an author that has come up in their writing by that route, I think they still love their books. They love their characters. They love the stories. And so that temptation, I have an MFA, so I sometimes can feel myself falling into that mode of, I want to make an intelligent comment about, the point of view in the book or themes, the kind of things that I would have written in college papers. And although in college I majored in government, not English, but so anyway, that was pretty intriguing, and it's fun to interview somebody like Lisa who has published a lot of books, and therefore there are a lot of interviews up with her, and there were some back 10 or more years, and I could see how she was answering questions when she was much younger and not as far into her career as she is now, and then there were some that were fairly recent, and that's a kind of research I really enjoy, because I taking notes on my iPad, and I'm trying to see themes in how she's talked about her latest book and books quite a ways back. And then, of course, the experience that she had consulting was intriguing to me. I know people that have worked in consulting firms, and I know what that job is like. And it was fun to see the similarities with what Frankie Elkin does when she drops herself into the middle of a cold case, whether it's in Mattapan, a tough neighborhood of Boston, or the Paposia Wilderness in Wyoming. And fun to see that her experience, those 2 years at the consulting company, a lot about spreadsheets, a lot about, analyzing markets and what are the best ways to communicate, kind of probably a version of a 2-year MBA program is what she went through at Mercer, that consulting firm. And now, although she's not self-published, she's publishing with a major publisher, she clearly has a grasp on her career, and I think she's publishing in 30 countries, and so I don't know how many millions of books she's sold, but it's a big number. And that combined benefit of the consulting work, where she learned how to ask questions, and she learned a lot about the business of publishing in a way that's been good for her. So good to see that when she was 21 or 22, she must have gone all in and engaged in that experience. And she was also writing at night. She'd put in these 12-hour days, and then she'd go home and she'd write until 11, writing romance novels. And she published 3 romance novels when she was in college. So, she's been a serious writer all along. And when she realized that she could just call up people, police detectives or FBI agents, and ask questions, that she didn't have to have the kind of experience in crime that some authors have, then she felt like she could take the bold step of venturing into the genre that really was her first love, as she said. So a good story, and I found her really enjoyable to talk with, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Since I last spoke with you on the episode with my conversation with Jerry Riddle, we've had a little unexpected drama here in Sanibel. Darlene ran a fever New Year's Eve of 103.6, and we called the nurse at Blue Cross Blue Shield, and we talked to our niece, who's a nurse, and they all said, an adult that has a fever that high, you need to go to the emergency room and get checked out. So she spent 2 nights in the hospital that time, came home, the fever came back, they were running tests the whole way, went back to the ER for another 2 nights, and they were eliminating pretty scary possibilities like meningitis, because she had a stiff neck and a fever, and different aspects of how her heart was coming across in some of these tests. And one by one, all the tests came back normal, and on Sunday, I think it was, they said, I guess you can go home. And the best theory on what happened was that it was some kind of a virus, that it wasn't COVID. Of course, they checked her for that, and it ran its course, and she hasn't had a fever, in the last week. She's pretty weak. Whatever it was, really set her back, and she's gradually returning to full strength. But we were settling into the new home here in Sanibel and thinking, boy, this is just great. We're riding bikes, going to the beach, and doing all that stuff. And we got to know the Lee Memorial Health System here in Lee County, and really pretty impressive hospitals and medical care and doctors and nurses. We were very impressed with everybody that ended up taking care of her. And so you never know. I think in some circumstances, it's good to be a pantser, someone that responds to things that come up. You have a plan, you plot it out. Well, we're going to buy a house, we're going to do this and do that, and then something happens, and you have to figure out what your characters are going to do about it. Only you are the characters in the story that unfolds. And just very grateful that she's okay, and everything's somewhat returning to normal here on Sanibel. I keep thinking of James McQuivey for the next conversation. It's probably been at least 6 months since I talked to James, and he's always good to talk to about the pandemic and Amazon, and he's just such a creative guy. So I suspect maybe later this month or early in February, I'll reach out to James, and we'll get him back on the show and see what's new in his life in the past few months. And I love getting emails from you. I heard from Shimon Schott in Poland that he was glad to see an episode show up in his queue, and others of you, I think, are loyally awaiting the next version of the Kindle Chronicles, even though it's not coming out every Friday the way it did for 13 years. And I love doing the interviews. I love having this continuing, occupation and the ability to have conversations and to know there are people listening that have been listening for a long time. So I'm grateful for those of you still here, picking up the Kindle Chronicles when it drops, and we'll just keep doing this and see where it goes. Hope you have a good day. Thanks for listening. Bye.